Okay, let's try that again. I think I'm live. Everywhere I'm trying to be live. Ah, technology, right? When you especially when you run an online business, it's like can't live with it, can't live without it. I'm not a tech person at all. So here we are. Thanks for bearing with me. I go live in my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness, and on my personal Facebook page and on YouTube. And so trying to coordinate those things can just be a little interesting. So nonetheless, so glad to be here today. Kinsey Berkwin here. As I was starting to share last time when I came on and then logged off, is today I'm going to walk you through Kristen's story because I personally could relate to Kristen's story in a lot of ways. And I'm sure there's a lot of you listening that can too. So before I get into that, actually, what her story, one of the biggest thing just around her story, it was chronic acid reflux that brought her in. And she had an endoscopy. Her that came back normal. Her gastroenterologist was prescribing omeprazole, and that was it. And she was trying to not start a medication. She was kind of under the impression that there's side effects that can cause nutrient deficiencies. And it's really not supposed to be used long term, but like that was what she was facing. And so she wanted to figure out what's actually causing this reflux and can it be fixed so that she doesn't have to be on a medication the rest of her life. She was like 26 at the time. So that's what I'm going to share today is talk about Kristen's story because we found some really unique findings in her case. Some things that you would expect, but some things that you wouldn't necessarily. And when those were addressed, like I said, we fixed her reflux. I've followed up with her for a couple of years now, and she's like, I'm good. So we fixed it in over the course of 3 months. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kinsey Berkwin. I'm an integrative nutritionist in my online nutrition and wellness practice called Progressive Health and Wellness, where I work with ambitious men and women who are struggling with their mental and physical health. And I take a root-caused body-mind approach to optimize, restore optimal mental and physical health. So as I get into it, we've got some people hopping on. Hello, thank you for joining. I know most of you watch the replay, which I love too. Like I'm the same way, right? We put this thing on while you're cooking dinner or like doing other things. And I'm going live at like 11:45 on a Monday. So most people are working. So if you're watching the replay or if you're with me live, please introduce yourself. Let me know where in the world you're watching from and tag me in any questions that come up. Questions, comments, feedback. I want to make these as relative as possible for you and informative as possible. So as I was starting to say with Kristen's story, so Kristen and I worked together back in like 2021, and she was a referral from a friend. And like I said, the biggest thing that brought her in was acid reflux that she had had for a long time, I think a year at that point, and was realizing it wasn't getting better on its own. She had worked with her doctor initially, like I said, had an endoscopy that came back normal. And she really wasn't given any other answer. She had tried to change her diet a little bit on her own, but to no avail. She was taking Tums, had tried some natural supplements, but again, nothing was really working. She had some other digestive symptoms too, mostly some bloating. And I clearly remember her saying she didn't know if she felt bloated until the end of us working together. And that's when she was able to look back and be like, oh, I was just chronically bloated. And she had been for so long. She didn't know that it was a symptom. It had become her normal. So she did have bloating, but she had regular bowel movements. She was having like on average 2 bowel movements per day. Bowel movements were pretty normal and consistent. Her sleep was good. Her energy was good. Her cognition was good. Her mood was good. She did want to lose weight. So that was the one other thing. She had some signs of hormone imbalance, and she did want to lose weight. And in a second, I'll share with you too some of the findings that we found in her blood work that was connected to the weight loss and how she was able to lose weight through us working together. So, in getting started, we have our initial deep dive consultations, how I start with everyone. We met for 90 minutes and we deep dive into her health history, her symptoms, what has she tried before that worked, what has she tried that didn't work, what have doctors said, all that kind of stuff. And towards the end of that appointment, we review labs. So we run blood work up front. It's a really comprehensive panel. I like to describe it as what a doctor would run at a routine physical, but really on steroids. So we look at an expanded thyroid panel, including antibodies. We look at nutrient levels like vitamin D and an iron panel and copper and zinc, some electrolytes, magnesium, things like that. Excuse me. We look at inflammatory patterns, we look at metabolic patterns so that we can really combine in that first appointment, start putting together patterns right away. Combine their subjective information, how they're feeling, their history, with the objective information, which is what the raw numbers and data say. And so through this in the initial labs, we were able to see she did have lower, like suboptimal iron levels. She was in like phase 1 of an iron deficiency, which is where like her serum iron levels were fine. Those were normal, but her ferritin, the storage form of iron, was starting to drop. And that happens early on in an iron depletion. And the only reason I share this is because we know that kind of connects back to the gut, right? So her GI issues, the reflux, iron, we need proper levels of hydrochloric acid to absorb iron. And the bloating, it was a lot of upper GI bloating. So the bloating was also, whatever was causing that was likely connected to the lower iron levels. So we saw that. And then the other big thing I wanted to point out in her case too was this just connects to the weight loss. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're talking about reflux today, but she did want to lose weight. She found it difficult to lose weight despite doing all the things. And she was insulin resistant. And we caught that very early on because had we just run the typical fasting glucose and hemoglobin A1C, she would have looked great. But her fasting insulin was at like 16. And that I want to see fasting insulin closer to like 5. So that shows she was becoming insulin resistant. Give it a couple of years of nothing changing, we would have seen the fasting glucose rise. We would have seen the hemoglobin A1C rise. And basically with high insulin like that, you're locked in fat storage mode. It makes it very difficult to burn fat for fuel because your body thinks you're constantly in a fed state. So why would it burn its reserves? And the calories you eat have a higher propensity to be stored as fat. So that kind of starts to lead us into, I'm going to talk about intermittent fasting. Not only does that help with the insulin resistance part, but it does help with intestinal health too. So keep that in mind. Okay, so we start Kristen on an anti-inflammatory diet, kind of a paleo-esque diet, paleo-Mediterranean. So it was gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, really low sugar, corn-free. We did implement the intermittent fasting. So with Kristen, I had her go about 16 hours overnight and then eat a full day's worth of calories within that 8-hour time frame. And start eliminating snacking. So space the meals by about 4 hours or so. So, she was eating around like 10 o'clock in the morning, between 10 and 11, between like 2 and 3, and between 6 and 7. And that checked all those boxes. And we started with all of that while we ran the GI map stool test and a food sensitivity panel. And when we met back about 3 weeks later we got those results in and we met back to check in. How have the nutrition changes been going? I also had her practice being like slowing down, especially around meal times, being really present with the meal, being calm, chewing the food thoroughly. I recommended a digestive enzyme to get started, some zinc carnosine, which is really soothing to the stomach lining. Some basic things, multivitamin. Actually, we used a medical food which has a full multivitamin, but also nutrients to support the drainage pathways and inflammation and gut health. And I think that was it. I think those were really the things that we started with in vitamin D. And then we met 3 weeks later to check in and review those test results. So within that time frame, she was starting to notice changes already. She had noticed dairy was a trigger. Dairy would tend to like contribute to the bloating. She was still having reflux. It was a little bit less, but she was still having it, maybe like 20% less. But the bloating had gone down, albeit again, she was still having it, but it had gone down. So she was noticing some changes. She'd lost like, I think like 3-4 pounds or so. So she was noticing some changes. But when we reviewed her test results, it was like, oh, well, kind of makes sense as to why you notice some, but not all changes, right? So the food sensitivity test. Now, I've given a lot of talks about food sensitivity testing and why they're not all created equal. So there are some great tests out there, and there are tests that you really just shouldn't waste your time with. So antibody testing, IgG, IgA testing, those home tests, you see them all online. I'm not going to name brands, but like you see them advertised and it's like ship to your house and like, they're antibody testing. It's just not worth it. I'm not going to go into the details of why in this talk. If you want more information about that, about why you can get false negatives, you can get false positives, go to my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. Search food sensitivities, and you'll find all that information there. But I do love food sensitivity testing. It can be a really great way at creating a truly personalized therapeutic diet when it's done with the right test. So the test I like is it's by Oxford Biomedical, and it's called the LEAP, L-E-A-P, Mediator Response Test. I talked about this in last week's live when I just did a deep dive on acid reflux and like the common things that can cause it. And I talked about how food sensitivities, because your body thinks that those are a threat, so it will upregulate acid production in order to try to protect itself from it. So food sensitivities can cause acid reflux as a symptom. So that's part of why we ran it, and with the bloating. And I have her test results pulled up right here. She didn't have any severe, no red results. They were all moderate, but one of them was solanine. So solanine is a food chemical that naturally occurs in nightshades. Nightshades are a very common trigger for acid reflux and other digestive issues, but other stuff like joint pain, for example, skin issues. So on top of the kind of modified paleo diet we were doing, we layered in nightshades. This went on to be critical because she went on to definitely notice a connection. Tomatoes, peppers of any kind, eggplant, paprika, white potato. Those are all nightshades, to name a few. And she did notice a connection to that in her reflux. She had also reacted to sweet potato, green pea. So green pea, like how many protein shakes are made with green pea? How many protein bars are made with green pea? Lots of healthy things like chickpea pastas will often have green pea in them. Like lots of healthy things can have green pea as another ingredient. Walnut, cashew, and almonds. So especially when you're starting to follow a more paleo style diet, a lot of people tend to rely on nuts, right? Nuts are a great snack. All nut butters. Again, think about like protein bars. They're going to be made with nuts. Milk alternatives, almond milk, right? There's going to be a lot of nuts. And so those were like some of the big ones, right? Walnut, cashews, and almonds. Strawberry, apple, wheat, cow's milk, cocoa, like cacao, cocoa, chocolate. So there were some other ones in there too, but I wanted to list those off because those are big ones, right? Those would be easily foods that someone would still be eating, even if they were doing kind of a generalized anti-inflammatory diet. So we had to cut those foods out. That made a big difference. So she was down to the point where the reflux was like 80% gone unless she ate one of those foods. But there were still some episodes happening. And the bloating, same thing, still reduced, but there were still some days where she's like, I haven't eaten any of these foods and I still feel kind of bloated. So that's what brings us to the stool test. We also reviewed her stool test in that first appointment. I have her stool results pulled up right here too. And interestingly, so full disclosure, when I wrote the like preview post for this live, I had written down that she had H. pylori. I had it in my memory that she had H. pylori. She did not. I was mistaken. In prepping for this live, I went through all of her labs and looked at it. She did not. Like it wasn't even measured, not even detectable. But what she did have was a measured level, it wasn't elevated, but it was a measured level of Shiga-like toxin E. coli. That's a pathogen. So on the GI map test, in the pathogen section, any section, but especially in pathogens, a pathogen can be recorded in black, meaning it was measured but within range, or in red, which means it's an acute infection. Because Shiga-like toxin E. coli, so there's lots of different species of E. coli. Some are normal to have. They're part of the normal commensal microbiome. Some are not, and this would not be normal to have ever. So what can happen, and what probably happened in Kristen's case, is, and we talked about this, at some point in her life, she had food poisoning, and she would have had active symptoms, diarrhea, vomiting, whole nine yards. Food poisoning like that the acute symptoms can go away, but it can settle into a low grade chronic problem that disrupts the gut microbiome. We saw this also in her immune system. Her GI immune system was suppressed. So she had low suboptimal levels of what's called secretory IgA, which is just it's like the army of the GI tract. It's the most abundant first line of defense immune cell. And when that's low, it indicates this can be from like chronic stress, low bacterial diversity, but it can also be from a chronic issue, the immune system trying to fight something for a long time, and it's essentially losing the battle. So that can also allow these like these acute infections to turn into a low grade problem. It's like a criminal that goes out and they're actively causing crime, but committing crimes, but then they go undetected for a while. And so then they just start doing smaller crimes. So the police don't catch them. They might not be, committing the same level of crime, but they're still criminals. So that was a big one, that it's going to be a continuous source of inflammation. And in last week, if you remember, I talked about how disruptions in the gut microbiome and inflammation as a whole contribute to acid reflux. Because in addition to stomach acid being important for digestion, it's also very protective. It's kind of part of the immune system, because if we ingest something in food, whatever it's water, whatever it is, let's pray it's killed in a vat of acid before it's passed on to the digestive tract. So if the intestines themselves are inflamed, that can be a hypersensitive reaction. So continuing, is this all making sense? If you're with me, comment below. Let me know if this is making sense. Do you have any questions that have popped up so far? So that was a really pivotal finding. But from there, the rest of her stool test, the biggest things that we found, she did have just general dysbiosis. So she had overgrown Pseudomonas, which is an opportunistic bacteria, can produce histamine. She had overgrown Streptococcus, which can also, again, pro-inflammatory, can often be associated with low hydrochloric acid. She had a few other dysbiotic bacteria, and then she had low elastase, so low pancreatic enzymes. And that can be so we're seeing a few different signs here that are pointing to actually low hydrochloric acid. So the stress that food sensitivities can cause, the stress of having this chronic low-grade infection, and then the low pancreatic enzymes really made me suspect the suboptimal levels of hydrochloric acid. Carrie, thank you for saying that. So glad that you're here, and I'm glad that this is helpful and that it's making sense. So what we went on to do is we implemented a antimicrobial protocol. So we wanted to kick the E. coli. We wanted to rebalance the opportunistic overgrowths. We wanted to support her bacterial diversity, digestion, and the immune system. So we used a product, it's a blend of products called Para 1 and Para 2. They are from Cellcore. I love Cellcore. They have kind of broad spectrum antimicrobial benefits, if you will. And so we used Para 1 and Para 2 together for 30 days. And at the same time, we also used specific strains of probiotics. So incorporated something called Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a really hospitable yeast that is great for like infections, for SIBO, for yeast, for opportunists in general. So we used that alongside the paras. We did that for 30 days as we were in the like remove phase. So we're trying to get rid of the bad. And then afterwards, 30 days, phase 2 is what I call it. We bring in the good, we restore the good. So in phase 2 is where we come in with prebiotics, and we used, I should have mentioned, we used digestive enzymes also that had some hydrochloric acid in it, some pancreatic enzymes in phase 1 and in phase 2. We came in with colostrum. So colostrum is loaded with immunoglobulins and prebiotics, really great for supporting the intestinal immune system and microbiome and the intestinal lining. And then we came in with like a classic mucinogenic support, so gut lining support. It's got glutamine and aloe and licorice, all the good things to restore her microbiome. Because I like to describe it as, when we see these opportunistic overgrowths or infections, or including low-grade infections, you can't just get rid of it and then do nothing about it. That would be like if you have, criminals taking over your city. You don't want to just get rid of the criminals. You want to then build up the police force, build up the good citizens that come to live in that city, like reshape the city ecosystem as a whole so that more criminals don't just come back, right? So that's what phase 2 is really all about. So that was our 3-month process. First 30 days, we're working with an kind of a general anti-inflammatory diet. Second 30 days, we start removing her food sensitivities. We got her stool test back. We did the antimicrobial process, phase 1. Third 30 days, we do phase 2, beautify and restore, if you will. And by that point, she didn't have reflux. She would notice some if she ate some nightshades, but that was about it. And then at that point, we talked about introducing foods back in, when to do that, how to do that. That was more of a long game because part of that also involves like being ready for that emotionally. Some people are like, oh my God, I feel so good avoiding these foods. I don't really want to rock the boat. Other people are like, oh my God, when can I eat these foods again? So we talk about how to navigate that and when to bring those foods back in. But after that, we went into a maintenance protocol. And that was it. And she was able to do that. Like I'm looking at we started meeting monthly. And then shortly after that, we went several months without meeting, and she was good to go. So that's what the process can look like. Now, I'm going to be really clear. I'm not going to paint a blue sky. That is not what the process looks like for everyone. For some people, it does. For a lot of people, it does. For a lot of people, we've got more to unpack. We're dealing with things like histamine intolerance or methane SIBO or mold toxicity, or things that are a lot more complicated that do take longer to fix. But I still expect to see progress over the first 90 days for sure. So even if the problem isn't fixed, people are still improving. But then, like I said, there's people like Kristen where they just get better. Hey, Rosemary, thanks for joining. Sweet potatoes don't seem to be a trigger for me. I have a lot of mucus lately. Got it. Yeah, mucus can. So acid reflux can cause mucus, but I also question, is it the other way around, right? Could histamine, for example, be causing mucus and that's what's causing the reflux? So food for thought. I obviously don't know your case, but just thought I would speak to that. All right. So was this helpful? If you're watching the replay, let me know, like, what was your biggest takeaway? If you're watching me live, also, what was your biggest takeaway? Share with us in the comments. And then, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Lastly, if you're watching this and you're like, I'm done trying this on my own. I'm tired of feeling this way all the time. I'm tired of dealing with reflux. Fill in the blank of what your symptoms are, and you're ready to find answers. Please, I invite you to schedule a free 15-minute discovery call. It allows us to get a chance to know each other better, talk more about the problems that you're having, what you're looking for. I'll share about my practice and process. And if it feels like a good fit for both of us, then we'll talk about what the next steps look like. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. So I'll drop the link in today's talk to schedule that call if you decide to. You can also go directly to my website, which is progressivehealthandwellness.com, and schedule the discovery call there. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your short week and a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you practice it with people from all over the world, so if you don't observe it, then just have a wonderful week. I'll see you next Monday. Have a great day. Bye.